Welcome to the Psychedelic Diaries. I am Ray Christian, and oh man, do we have a show for you today. Today we'll be discussing psychedelic conferences, legal psilocybin therapy in Canada, and of course, experiences on high doses of psychedelics. Matt Stang, CEO of Delic Corp, will be joining us momentarily for a deep dive and a soul search. But as usual, let's kick things off with a nugget and a noodle. In today's news nugget, legal psilocybin therapy in Canada. My sources are telling me that the first ever legal psilocybin assisted therapy that was not part of a clinical trial was completed last week, thanks to Canada's special access program. So keep an eye out for the official press release on that one this week. And as for the noodle, something I've been noodling on of late, weaning people off of alcohol. Psychedelic use tends to change your relationship with alcohol. It becomes easier to spot the connection of when I drink, I feel different for a number of days. Or as Dr. Jim Fadiman likes to put it, now your body actually gets a vote. The challenge is that alcohol is in fact a wonderful tool to unwind after a long week or celebrate a big win. So if we reduce or remove alcohol, it kind of leaves a hole. And as Yuval Harari mentioned in Sapiens, you can't just get rid of a myth. You have to actually replace it. So how do we replace the myth that alcohol is the way to loosen our load? Cannabis is great, but not always the best for sharp, quick-witted socializing or for remembering the name of the person you just met. So perhaps it's a team effort to replace alcohol. And maybe we can take inspiration from the brilliant menu of options that Sasha Shulgin left us in his book, PCAL. Something to noodle on. Our next guest is the CEO and founder of Delic Corp, a longtime leader at High Times and founder of the Meet Delic Conference. Matt Stang, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Oh, wonderful to have you. So, Matt, you worked at High Times for years. You've launched the Meet Delic Conference that I attended last November and loved. Thank you for that. And you now have the largest network of psychedelic clinics in the US. Matt, what is it about these altered states that inspires you to do all this?
Well, to me, it's the only way that we can affect real change in mental health, right? I think there is a secondary pandemic going around, the mental health pandemic. Suicides are up 5 times of what they've ever been, and people need help. And what the current crop of pharmaceuticals has done is made people just feel hopeless, right? There's just not great solutions to depression, to PTSD, to overwhelming anxiety. And, I think this is an answer. It's not the answer. I don't want to be dogmatic about it, but it is a very, very good answer. And, my wife and I co-founded this company 4 years ago because we believe incredibly strongly that psychedelics are a real way to change your mind, as Michael Pollan said. And I think it's a huge issue, in the modern world. Is how does someone with a giant brain deal with all of these default mode network issues? And I think the way that I see it, the way that I see people getting better is through psychedelic therapy. And so we've really gone in and become the largest chain of clinics for this, really focusing on what's available now, but really pushing into what's available in the future, because we think there's going to be a whole range of novel psychedelic compounds that will be approved by the FDA in the next 3 to 5 years. And so we built a large infrastructure for people to come and get help. My personal story, my wife and co-founder has an anxiety disorder, and she found therapy, and it changed her life. And so we really went after being the largest in this space because we saw the change that it could help, that it could bring to people's lives, in our life, and we want to do that at scale. And the only way to get to scale is to get big and make it available for people across this country, so that there is an alternative option to just doing nothing or taking pharmaceuticals that only work half the time and have terrible side effects and leave you feeling like crap, right? And so that's been our big push, and we think it's a huge opportunity, and we think it'll change people's lives.
You know, I was a little bit skeptical of Keta for a while. I'm kind of a psilocybin guy. And then about 2 weeks ago, I had my first experience at a Keta clinic. And one of the first thoughts that I had coming out of my experience, and I had the full dose, 100 milligrams, was this is an important compound. And I think it's like a wedge buster. It opens things up. And I think what you're doing is important. And just want to say, Matt, thank you for being a trailblazer in this space. And I think, and congrats, by the way, on the recent acquisition, becoming the largest operator. That's big stuff. I've been a part of an IP suite sale. That is a non-trivial amount of work. So pulling that off, I'm sure, was a lot of hair pulling and a lot of work. So congrats on that. And again, thank you for all the stuff you're doing. Even going back to your high time days when it was maybe a little bit more counterculture than it is now. You were doing good work then, and you still are now. And speaking of which, it kind of feels like, Matt, that cannabis was perhaps the NFL fullback busting through the line and creating a hole so that psychedelics, perhaps the halfback, had a big hole to work with. And you've seen now both industries develop at various stages. What lessons do you think we can take from cannabis and apply to psychedelics?
Sure. Well, I totally agree with you. I think cannabis blazed the trail. I think, it showed that people are not okay with the war on drugs as it was fought over the last 40 or 50 years. And I think by showing popular discontent and by showing a pathway to local change, we've, it's already happened. Oregon already legalized psilocybin for therapeutic use, right? There's already a one state in this nation that has created not only a legal psilocybin framework, but total decriminalization of other psychedelics. And I think that will continue forward in other states as well. As to what you can learn, I think it's a whole bunch of different stuff, because to me it's like there's two tracks. There's the one track that's the personal use and personal freedom track, which I think is very interesting and will have a lot of resonance. And then I think there's the science track, which cannabis never really got on, because cannabis was so prohibited and forbidden that the only version you could use for scientific research was the worst product I've ever seen from the University of Mississippi that looked worse than swag, right? And that was the only available product for doing scientific research in America. And it took years of applications and security sign-offs and all these other things, and it still didn't really work, right? So there's really not very much good, super detailed scientific research around cannabis.
What was that, Matt? Was that Marinol?
No, that's actual cannabis. So cannabis was grown. Oh, it was. They called it G13, Government 13, and it was grown at the University of Mississippi, and it was what was circulated to the 5 patients who had legal marijuana prescriptions, and it was what was given to labs that wanted to do cannabis research. And it was almost impossible to get. So what you have is a complete lack of actual quality, right? So there was no quality product. It took forever to get it. So there was no scientific research. Now, when you look at psychedelics, that never happened. While it was made illegal, while all of the classic psychedelics were criminalized, there was still access at the scientific level for people to do research. So there's years and years of really amazing scientific research showing the benefits of psychedelics from blue chip institutions, from Johns Hopkins, Imperial College, NYU. And I think that piece is what changes the dynamic, because rather than us having a conversation about what I think or I feel, here is hard scientific evidence showing that these different compounds are dramatically changing people's quality of life and mental health. And that means that rather than us having to have a debate where we talk for hours about which thing is better and if it's going to be okay, and then we try to push it through. We have real scientific work that stretches back dozens of years, and that piece, that second psychedelic revolution, right? There's a first one that goes from the 50s to the 60s when it got criminalized after the war on drugs really started. And then for the last 20 years, there's been a second psychedelic revolution of science. That scientific work is putting it so that MDMA and psilocybin are both, 2 years from being approved by the FDA, in my mind. It might be a little longer, it might be a little shorter. And then 3 to 4 years for DMT, LSD, ayahuasca, ibogaine. All of these things are all in phase 2 clinical trials and having incredible results. So that tells me that rather than us having to have this kind of personal debate about whether it's okay or not based on apocryphal understandings of it made me feel better, so it's cool. It's like, no, these are people who have treatment-resistant depression, the worst PTSD that's ever happened from soldiers. The range of people with different forms of mental health disorders who have been incredibly benefited by psychedelics and documented in double-blind gold standard studies is immense. And so what does that mean? That means that rather than us having to have this long-term conversation and try to figure out how to push through, and you look at the bill that passed the House last week for marijuana legalization, and you have people saying, "Oh, you guys are focusing on drugs instead of inflation and crime," right? That is the kind of classic, not really grounded in reality. It's just about opinions, right? This is grounded in statistical fact, which tells me that we're going to have both a state legal model that embraces the use for personal benefit, or call it, like the biohacking type or microdosing type, where people are looking
Recreational.
Yeah, I would not quite say recreational, but yes, recreational versus a truly medical model, because these are some of the most promising medical drugs for mental health disorders that we've ever seen. And so, from my standpoint, the reason that we're building a medical model of clinics around the country is we believe these will be available more than just the one that is available right now. Shortly, and people will need a trusted place to go to get safe and effective care. And that's where I think it very much diverges from cannabis, right? So it's like you have both the pathway that cannabis has blazed, that I believe we're going to go along in some of these states that have voter initiatives or strong liberal progressive kind of governmental organizations. I think those places will inevitably push through some form of human potential version of psychedelics where people can use them without getting in trouble. And then there's the actual folks, the 20% of the population that have mental health disorders, for whom this is a necessity. It's not just a choice. It's a thing that will help them live a better, happier, longer life, right? Which takes it out of the hands of, oh, well, this is a good way to unwind on a Saturday night, and puts it to well, this is a way that you don't wind up killing yourself, right? You wind up actually not feeling so horribly depressed, disconnected, like there's nothing to live for.
Well put. And I like that delineation between the two paths. It does kind of feel like we miss an opportunity with cannabis because there is some medical use, whether it's for nausea or stress or anxiety, and we missed it. And it doesn't sound like we're going to miss it, at least not for lack of effort in psychedelics. And speaking of which, Matt, let's just wave a magic wand here and assume that psychedelics, whether medicinal or recreational, whatever you want to call that second path, it's fully legal. And respectful, intentional use is the norm in all settings, in both settings. And then 5 to 10 years passes by. How is that world different?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think there's a lot less suffering, mental health suffering, right? I think there's, you look at the, call it, dozen to 2 dozen classic psychedelic novel compounds that are out there. And each one is very different, and each one has a very different effect, and used in an intentional kind of safe container with intention and with integration, have these incredible pathways to healing for trauma and for depression and for the classic um, underlying conditions that cause these mental health disorders. And so I think if you had access to all of these things, if we had access to ibogaine, how many people could we get off of heroin before they
Mm.
drop dead? Right? It's like that is a substance that literally you take it and you are no longer physically addicted to the drug you were addicted to. That's incredible, and that's illegal right now. You have to go to Mexico, which is its own thing, and you have to go to a place that's kind of uncertain and unsure and unregulated to go get it. What happens when you can go take a MDMA with your partner and have 5 years worth of marriage counseling in 6 hours? And
Mm.
how many divorces do that preclude? How many children wind up growing up in a stable household instead of a broken household? And how many of those people don't have trauma? There's so many different pieces of this, right? How many people will find, their solace in 5-MeO, DMT, and see a place of whatever they call it, white love or God, or God's love, or there's a billion different ways that people have interpreted it. But how many people will find self-love and then not
Mm.
hurt themselves or act destructively to themselves or hurt their children or hurt their friends, or it hurt people, right? And I think if
Mm.
we look at this as a 5-10 years after this is available, I think there's just a lot of people. And look, it's not going to be everybody, because everybody doesn't want to be better. There's a ton of people who want to live in their misery, and they want to live in their pain, and they want to live in their trauma. And that's not going to change just
Yes.
because there's modalities out there to help. But it will help a lot of people who want help. And that's really, to me, even if we're helping, let's say 20% of the people need it and 5% of those 20% go for it, that's still, I don't know, 15 million helped people. That's a massive change in our country. And I'm just talking our country. I don't even know, the rest of the world, 7 billion people. It's pretty massive. So, and as people see that and feel that change, acceptance comes. And that's what I learned from cannabis, was that, as we really broadcast the message of medical marijuana in the early 2000s, the change was so huge, from a 20% acceptance rate to a 92% today, right? And what is
Mm.
that? That's people who see, my mother died of cancer. She had cancer 3 times in her life. And the only thing that helped her with her chemo and with her inability to eat was cannabis. And at that point, it was fully illegal. And it was stunning, the change it wrought when she consumed cannabis after her
Mm.
chemotherapy appointments. And when you see that in in my case, my mom, in someone's case, their grandma or their aunt or their best friend, after they see it, they're never the same. And your opinion never goes back. You're like, this has to be available to people going through this. It's inhumane that we have something that works like this and we're not letting
Mm.
people use it. And that's why medical marijuana has above a 90% support rate, because these are people who are usually dying, or maybe potentially dying, and there's nothing else, literally nothing else, that helps. You can't argue. It's just, and that's what I feel will happen with psychedelics when people are stuck in their negative thought patterns. They're stuck in their depression. They're stuck in their anxiety, and they just can't get out of them. And then you can actually get them out of them. It's just such a huge thing, and I just don't see people going back. Once they see people getting that help, once it's their friend or their cousin or their mother or their loved one, there's no chance that you can ever put it back. You can't put the horse back in the barn at that point.
Mm.
And I just see it.
I love this concept of the hypocrisy of seeing something you can't unsee. In Canada, for those that are chronically ill, terminally ill, there is an approved drug essentially for assisted suicide, but there is no approval for any of these psychedelics. So the government says, yes, you can take a drug that will literally kill you, but you can't take a drug that could dramatically improve the rest of your life for all these other purposes. And what an interesting, strange world we live in, but perhaps that's changing. And one of the things that made me think of that was one of my favorite quotes that you said, Matt, which was, you said, cataclinics are tip of the spear and novel molecules are coming shortly thereafter. I know for sure MDMA and psilocybin are incredibly effective. Matt, I love the power and clarity of that message. And I'm curious, what has your personal journey with psychedelics been like?
It's been many years and many moons.
Hmm.
Having uh, owned and operated High Times, I got to interact with some of the foundational people in the psychedelic world. I know you mentioned Sasha Shulgin. We brought his chemist to our Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam and gave Sasha a Lifetime Achievement Award. And my friend was Sasha's caretaker for 10 years
Hmm.
at his ranch. So I've had a great deal of wonderful interactions. I got to meet the founding members of the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, the folks who brought
Hmm.
LSD to the masses. So I've had many interesting experiences with the folks who have brought psychedelics out to the world, and my personal journey has been very transformational. And I believe incredibly strongly that used, obviously I was a kid in I grew up in a big city in New York and had access to substances outside of healing modalities and had a great time doing that. But I think finding the intentional use of psychedelics for healing is a very different thing than going to a rave party and dancing for 7 hours. They are the dance party is incredibly fun, and it's still going strong. We were down in Florida during Ultra Music Festival last weekend, and there was a couple 100,000 kids dressed up dancing, and there was clearly some substances being had. But to me, I think the future of this is the healing modality, right? And that taking substances with a trusted guide who can focus your intentions towards healing, who can hold a safe container during an experience, and who can integrate what you took from that experience shortly thereafter so that it doesn't fade away, so that you pull the powerful kind of transformational messages that you get from it and hold it with you in everyday life. And I think it's an incredible, powerful thing that not a lot of people have really experienced. And when they do, it is life altering and changing. That's been one of the big things about doing this project over the last 4 years is the number of people who've come up to me, both uh, inside of this space, but also just folks who are, super successful in other parts of the capitalist journey who have said, this is the biggest transformational experience was that time I did this for
Yes.
a weekend and changed my life. And, now I believe so strongly that this is it. This is how we connect to each other and ourselves in a way that is meaningful and real.
Hmm. I love this. And I like how you mentioned intentional psychedelics for healing. And then the same answer you talked about, you mentioned the recreational side, and that's still going. And it feels like it might be good. It's good to focus on the medical side. But at the same time, perhaps we can try to remove the stigma on recreational use because a lot of times that opens the doors. I know it did for me as a young adult in college, high school, exploring a little bit. But to your point, then actually 10 to 15 years went by where I didn't touch a psychedelic. And then when I did, and I did it with intention, it ended up being a very different experience. And speaking of which, I'm curious if we can take a stab at the ineffable and just one particular transcendent experience. I'll share one and I'll kick it to you, Matt. Um, Actually, my first experience at a keta clinic a couple weeks ago, I experienced ego death. And it felt like this like slow, persistent expansion of my consciousness somehow into the infinite. And I felt and saw things that at the time made it feel like it would be impossible to come back. And yet, much to my surprise, here I am back in the meat suit. And one of the takeaways I had, though, was that in this space of the infinite, it felt like I knew everything, I saw everything, all powerful. I felt um, that connection to everything and that paradoxical everything and nothing. So when I came back here, it felt like, no, I know that I could have stayed up there, but I was sent back. And I was in this space of infinite knowledge and I was sent back. So if I'm here for a reason. And that concept has really stuck with me and I'm thankful for it. And curious, Matt, if you don't mind sharing, what is one mystical experience that still resonates with you?
Yeah, well, thank you. My first ketamine experience, actually, about 3.5 years ago, I went and did it with my wife at a doctor's office, and it was mind-boggling. Right? It's quick. Um, it's a but it inside of the experience feels like there's no time, right? Because you kind of dissolve your ego to the point of just uh, I would say like floating outside of myself in a way that was incredibly powerful and really restorative. Um, but what's interesting is having done it with my wife, who has an anxiety disorder. She came out of it crying and laughing and saying she'd never been changed more. Where I just was like smiling, right? So it was a very different experience as someone who for whom it was a very amazing experience, but less transformational. She had a fully transformational experience. So, it was incredibly powerful for me, even though it only lasted 45, maybe 50 minutes of actual experience. It felt like could have been days. And then, less than an hour later, I was totally back to being normal, which is a really amazing thing. I think that's one of the things that really made us so interested in exploring ketotherapy for people, because we think that ability to come in and do it at noon and be back at work at 3:30 is really incredible, because it allows people to have these experiences while still maintaining a normal life. And we think that that's a huge part of this. Is we don't want this to feel like it has to be outside of the scope of what you do. It can just be part of your life.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you for sharing that and for your wife's story. I think that could resonate with a lot of people. So, Matt, this has been a phenomenal deep dive. Thank you for that. Got to transition to the Soul Search speed round. So, Matt, question number one. You get to relive the life of any historical figure. Who you got?
Whoo, man, that is a hard one. There's so many good ones. Maybe Ben Franklin. I like that guy.
Ben Franklin. That's cool. I just saw there's a documentary, the Ken Burns documentary coming out on him very soon. Okay, so number two, you have a new co-founder, Matt. Let's say meet Delic, Delic in general. You sell all your hopes and dreams. Everything is just incredible. And then you're off to the next venture. And you're getting ready to add your first co-founder with you. Would you rather have a co-founder, Matt, that talks too much or too little?
Too little.
Question number three. You have experience with ego death, I think, Matt, with all of your vast experiences across the psychedelic spectrum. What do you think happens when we die?
Oh, I have no idea, honestly. It is totally ineffable, and I think it is meant to remain that way.
Okay, fair enough. Question number four. Matt, who is a current role model of yours?
Does that mean someone who's alive?
Your call.
My mentor, Michael Kennedy, who was a fantastic lawyer and civil rights uh, champion, legal lion, really incredible guy.
Michael Kennedy. I'm sure that would warm his heart to hear that. Okay, Matt, I'm going to cheat and add one bonus question. I got to ask because that conference was such a delight back in November. I think it's coming back this year. Meet Delic. What is one highlight from the conference that sticks out to you?
There was a woman who came on and sang um, in the most. She was of a native tribe, and she did this incredible kind of almost animalistic singing that was one of the most beautiful, transcendent things I've seen in my entire life. And she came on. She was part of our opening act. I didn't even know we booked a guy to do an opening act, and he brought her, and she transfixed us. We were just like, what in the hell is this incredible, transcendent woman that is like tapping into some sort of total allness of being? So yeah, that was amazing to me.
Wow, what a beautiful explanation. I missed that, and I appreciate that share. That was an excellent speed round, Matt. Thank you for that. And last little question: where can the viewers find you?
So deliccorp.com for the corporate website. KWC, Ketamine Wellness Centers. You can go to realitysandwich.com, and you can go to meetdelic.com. So we have a bunch of platforms that you can come check us out, and deliccorp.com has all of them connected.
He is Matt Stang, the CEO of Delic Corp. This was wonderful, Matt, and thank you for joining the show.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next week, Rebecca Nicholson, founder of 5D Capital, will be joining us. And thank you for watching this episode of Psychedelic Diaries. I am Ray Christian. See you next time.